Hello and good evening. Try and get closer, but she's got a massive chair. Put myself off now. Right, okay. So tonight we're going to talk about teaching skills and not subjects. As always, we'll give people a couple of minutes to get on and get notifications and all that type of thing. Hopefully on the right side this time. Oh, look, there's someone there. We must be. Great. So we just feel this is quite an important subject, and I feel personally, because of the changes to all the potential changes to the Part 3, I think it's relevant. I've spent the day today with a PDI that's just taken his first pupil out as a member of the family. He's got himself a dual control car. He's insured it for purpose. He's not on a training licence. So he's doing something very similar to, I'm going to advise people in the future, and he's taken his first family member out yesterday, and we were talking about what to teach them, how to teach them. It really boiled down to teaching skills, not subjects. And of course he's in his PDI head, and he was trying to teach skills, and it didn't go brilliantly. So we had a good old chat about that and had a coffee and went through that. And I think that's very relevant for newly qualified ones as well, because the PSTs are so subject based. When you do Part 3, you'll talk to teach crossroads or whatever. At no point will you have to teach clutch control. No point will you have to teach steering. No point will you have to teach awareness and planning to any great extent. Gears, changing, nothing like that. They can do all those things as long as you say the right things at the right time. And that's why personally, this is going off subject a little bit, but while people come on, why personally we're great fans of the change, aren't we? Because it's going to solve these issues really. Because I don't feel, and I know it's my job and how I pay the mortgage, but I don't feel that you come out passing the Part 3 at the moment with the skills, your own skills, to teach the skills that you need to teach, if that makes sense. And I was feeling that with the PI today, that he's not teaching he's not gaining the skills that he needs to teach these skills, and that's what tonight's about really.
Yeah, so I think that again, any of you guys that have either heard us talk before or have come to our workshops will hear that one of our passions to try and get across is teaching skills rather than subjects. And I quite often ask driving instructors if they can name the skills that we teach. And we very often have a brainstorm about the skills we teach, and we literally come up with 5 or 6 skills that we teach. So I would suggest that the main skills that we're teaching as driving instructors is kind of general car control, which of course in there you would include your clutch control and your steering, although I can't really remember having to teach steering particularly. It's more of a natural kind of thing. But let's say general coordination, car control is in there. Awareness and planning, that's a big skill that we're teaching. Judgment is a big skill that we're teaching. I'd argue that that's probably the skill that we don't teach very well, particularly, but we may come on to that. Or
instructors. I had another conversation with PDI today who's on pink licence, and she's realised, and talking to her, that she's doing the judgment for the pupils, and they're not taking responsibility for the judgment. In other words, she's telling them when to go and when not to go, not particularly building up their knowledge of that. And then they're going to test and they're struggling with the judgment because they're relying on her to give the judgment and not themselves.
Observations, so that would obviously include mirrors and general looking around. And I would say that the biggest skill that we should be looking at, and perhaps we're not, is the ability to self-evaluate. And those are the skills. So if we look at a subject, so if you take roundabouts for example, my argument would be, what skills are you teaching at roundabouts? Well, awareness and planning, clutch control and judgment. It comes into those things. Which again comes into awareness and planning in a way, doesn't it? Your observation.
And the thing I say, to simplify, I teach stop, start and steer, and when to stop, start and steer. And there's obviously bits within that, but that's what I believe that we teach. And I can remember saying that to someone 8-9 years ago. So before I met Lou and the coaching and stuff like that, I've always taught that. Self-reflection, I think, is the newest thing for me, teaching that. I have always taught that in some degree, but not called it that, or really gone to enough. I used to say to my pupils, once you've passed, if something happens, someone bibs their horn, or someone or something happens, or someone makes you slow down, or something like that, don't always have a go at the other person. Look at your part in it. If you're there, you have a part to play. That's probably as far as I've gone with it. I think that's a basic principle of it, but I go a lot further than that now. So I think, and we know that when people pass, if they don't self-reflect, they're always blaming someone else. Cars keep putting out in front of them at roundabouts. Maybe they're going too fast around the roundabout, but if they're not evaluating that, they're always going to have people putting out in front of them at roundabouts. It's just always going to happen because they're not evaluating. If you don't evaluate, you can never improve. Whether it be driving a car, whether it be bringing up a family, cooking spag bol, whatever. If you don't evaluate it, you're never going to improve on it. And I think that's that's the one thing that instructors don't tend to do a lot of, with their pupils all themselves. And as Lou says, I think that's probably the biggest skill to do with them, really, because that allows for a continual development.
One of the reasons why I think it's probably quite important that we put more of an emphasis on the skills rather than the subjects that we're teaching is that if you were to take your last test fail, so the last L test fail that you had, and you looked at the reasons why the pupil failed, I would probably suggest that in 90% of the cases they have failed for an awareness and planning or a judgment issue. It's those
Idea of
skills.
car control.
And that, okay, it might well not have not gone down in the awareness and planning box. In fact, very rarely does it go down in the awareness and planning box. It will go down in the pedestrian crossing box, but it will be because they weren't aware of it or they weren't planning for it. It will go down as the meeting box because they weren't aware, they weren't planning for it. Think about those kind of skills. And so whatever it is that you are perhaps struggling with the pupil, so if you've got a pupil at the moment who you know is struggling, I bet they're struggling with a skill, not struggling with pedestrian crossings.
They might struggle with the subject, but it's the skill that's causing the problem with the subject.
Yeah.
And you'll find that then they have a problem with that, whether it be pedestrian crossings or lights or roundabouts. It's going to be the same skill that's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's the bit you need to find and deal with. And very often it is, because once they can stop, start and steer, and most people stop, start and steer within a few hours. I mean, car thieves can stop, start and steer and they don't get any training and they seem to do all right with that, don't they? But they crash because they don't evaluate and plan or self-evaluate, and then they go too fast around the corner. So, but they get the clutch control and the steering and stopping. And yes, you're going to have pupils that do struggle. I know there's going to be some messages in a minute about that, but that's probably 1 in 20, something like that. You have to probably go in a bit more depth. But instructors do tend to be subject-based, not necessarily crossroads and roundabouts, but particularly manoeuvres, I think. Whereas look at the skills for manoeuvres rather than the manoeuvre itself. So if you can correct it, as long as you're looking and you've got the clutch control, they're the main things there, then you can always correct the manoeuvre rather than spending hours trying to get the same distance all the way around the corner. If you can put it right, you can do it right. And I prefer to work on the putting it right than the doing it right, because when you can put it right, you can do it right. And then you've got a more round. They will always get marked down on a test for it, which I disagree with, but this isn't the place to argue about that, really. So, sorry?
I was interrupted mid-flow, but we're quite good at doing that in general. But I had 2 points to make, and I can't remember what the second point was now. But the first point being that if a pupil failed, it would be because of a skill rather than that. I guess my second point is to encourage you guys to go away and think about how you do these skills yourselves. So how do you do awareness and planning? Because if you don't know how you do awareness and planning, or how you do judgment, because we just do it, don't we, with experience, then it's really hard to think about how you're going to teach it. And I would suggest that maybe one of the reasons we're not focusing on skills is because they are really hard to teach. How do you teach judgment? How do you teach awareness and planning kind of a skills? So go off and start questioning yourselves about how you're doing that. I would say particularly the judgment ones. So certainly the more and more lessons, and the hundreds and hundreds of lessons that I'm sitting in on, the awareness and planning and the judgment are the big things that our pupils are struggling with. And the reason why they struggle with anything to do with any kind of judgment, the decision making that is involved, that is needing judgment, is that the way we come up with judgment, the way we make the right judgment, is by having experience, and the one thing that pupils lack is experience, and so that's what we're having to give them to make those right things. So how are they making decisions about when it's okay to pull out? Are they making decisions about where the gap is on the roundabout? How are they making a decision about whether that guy is catching them up in the right-hand lane before they move out around the bicycle? And actually start looking at how you make those decisions and look at the factors that are involved with making the decisions. Because again, I think driver instructors are very good at coming up with solutions, so encouraging people to look, encouraging people to slow down and give themselves more time to think, or think about what are we thinking about.
What do you do if you see it?
Yeah.
And how do you know that is a problem? And
yeah.
and it comes back to the evaluation. I think it all comes back to that is are you encouraging your pupil to evaluate once they've pulled out? So check in the mirror for the reasons that we state, but not more importantly, but just as importantly, to see if they are catching up. So that was a little bit of misjudgment because they were catching up. So encouraging them to look to see if it was right or wrong, because you build knowledge on that. You build it, they build it. You can tell them when to go, of course you can use your knowledge, but it's also then getting them to transfer that knowledge to them. So actually that speed and that distance wasn't right. That speed and that distance was right. And by talking about it a lot and say, getting to check them in and saying, let's see, he caught you up a bit there. So on the next one, let's try that. But it could have caught you up because it just pulled out the other junction. And when people pull out, they accelerate. So again, it's about adding more detail and more information. And I think what Lou says is right. We'll look at some of these in a moment, what people are saying. But what Lou is right about people, about instructors, your own ability to judge and all that. And we don't know, so we can't, we're not making a sweeping statement. But it does, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, and it makes me cringe sometimes when you see things on YouTube and you see things on sites where people have got webcams and stuff, and the number of times that things happen and the instructor says, oh, well, you couldn't have known that was going to happen. And why did he do that? And have a go at the person, as the other driver, because they pulled out whatever. But actually, you could see it was going to happen, but they clearly didn't see it was going to happen because there was no instruction or any help, and there certainly wasn't a conversation afterwards about it, just about it being a what's it thingy. Do you agree? Not always, but there's some missed opportunities we see on those videos, don't we, sometimes?
I think we all fall down on missed
opportunities,
opportunities, learning
I'm
opportunities.
not picking on people that put videos on thingy. I'm just saying that gives you an insight into other people's car, which can be useful sometimes, I think.
Yeah. So I guess our kind of message to you guys is go off and think about what skills you're going to teach. So if you think about your lessons tomorrow, think about the guys that you've got in your diary tomorrow, think about where they're at in their learning process, and go and just make a little note in the diary or next to their names or something about the skills that you know that they are going to have to work on rather than the subjects. Darius said, Darius was just saying that judgment must be taught in small pieces along with skill teaching. And we can't leave it all to the end. No, I think that judgment and awareness and planning is something I'm using right in my first lesson. Certainly did on my standards check. We were looking at general awareness and planning and judgment and things.
You can bring it in like anything, because it's a massive skill. You have to sort of edge it in. But I think everything you say and do helps their judgment. So first lesson, you could be talking about what you're thinking on the way, but keep it simple-ish rather than sort of overpowering someone. But the person running towards the edge of the road, the person that's just stopped slightly to open the door, that sort of has a perception stuff, but people aren't always covering it or going into enough detail. And so the reason people don't tend to do it is because they don't do it themselves. And this is what the part 2 is supposed to sort of dig out a little bit, but on the part 2 they're not looking for that very high level of anticipation or awareness that I think they probably should be, to sort of enhance that skill with people, really.
Mm-hmm. Lorna's question is, any tips on how to teach overtaking? No dual carriageways, rarely have cyclists in small town I teach in. Do you know, I think, Lorna, that's almost a subject in itself, isn't it? Because we've certainly got some ideas and tools and tips that we would use. So that's a really good one, Lorna. Will you kind of bear with us, and maybe we'll do a whole kind of 10-minute section on how we teach overtaking, because this is a big one about judgment, isn't it? This is a big discussion on how we're getting these young, novice, inexperienced people to make judgments. And actually I would say perhaps if we do a live chat on overtaking, teaching overtaking, one of the biggest things that Blaine and I teach when we teach overtaking is making the decision not to. And so actually the fact that you're saying that you rarely have opportunities to overtake, it doesn't mean there aren't going to be opportunities, but there's going to be an awful lot more opportunities to talk about why you wouldn't and when you wouldn't. But we'll bring that up, Laura. I think that would be a good one. We'll make a little note to self. Yeah, well, absolutely. We'll put that on the list. And 60% of fatal accidents with newly qualified drivers are on rural roads, and I would like to bet there's 2 reasons for that. One is inappropriate speed on bends particularly, and the other one is inappropriate overtaking. And the one thing we don't tend to teach as instructors is overtaking. I don't mean going past cyclists, I don't mean dual carriageways, because to me that's lane changing, not overtaking. It's the ability to get out and get back in with enough time, etc., etc., which we know as experienced drivers is quite difficult. And I hardly ever overtake on our rural roads around here, because you know that if someone comes pretty fast the other way, you're not going to get back in. But that's experience again, isn't it? Because I got caught out once or twice when I was younger, but I self-reflected, and this comes back again to the self-reflection, teaching them if they do it and it's a bit dodgy,
to then learn from that. And unfortunately, people don't tend to learn from their mistakes, which is why people reoffend. That's why people make the same mistakes over and over again. So that's one of our biggest skills. But absolutely, we'll look at that as an individual subject, because I think we can possibly do some filming for that as well, can't we? So we do some stuff with our pupils about that.
So a little bit of a wind up of the conversation, because these are just like short little snippets, to get you guys to think about the skills that you're teaching rather than the subjects. So thinking about your awareness in planning, your judgment, your observations and your self-evaluation, so how you're teaching those skills and getting those skills across. Think about the pupils that you've got in your diary tomorrow, and think about the skills that they're struggling with, and then how you can teach those skills, and look at how you use those skills yourself. So particularly awareness and planning, decision making, judgment, those skills. How are you making those decisions? What factors are you taking into account when you have made those decisions? Because those are the things that need to be got across to our young, fresh-brained, novice kind of people. So go away and think about that.
And look at your own judgment and all that. Yeah, so we've got these, I think, I can't remember what the next one is, but it's on the list, isn't it?
Next
the
week,
list is on, so it's on
next
the
week.
list.
We'll put it on the comment section. We'll add a link to the next week's.
Yeah, and that's on mindful scaling on my map, isn't it?
It is on, I think it might be on my map. So those of you guys that are wanting to know a little bit more about my maps, then I'm going to do a live chat specifically about that next week.
And these little live chats are brought to you by Marmalade, is the advertising bit, by Marmalade Network. So if you are not sure what they do or how they can help you, they're basically a support network which we're part of. We're part of the ADI support system there, and you can earn commissions and things like that, which isn't our expertise. But if you go to marmaladenetwork.co.uk, it tells you all about it there. It's free to join up, and you can end up having memberships to our site, for example, for discounts, and even free if you for certain memberships and things like that. But the memberships are free basically. But go and have a look, and if you feel like it, you can just join up.
They're good guys, and these live chats are kind of sponsored by them really, and certainly they are a nice potential alternative to associations as well. So no joining fee, possibility of earning some money yourself with your pupil commissions, as well as some great kind of ADI opportunities like indemnity insurance and Halford's cards and breakdown cover and us.
That's a very good one.
So next week, Mind Maps, we'll put a link both to Marmalade and to next week's Mind Map chat,
put the list on.
And we will put your Overtaking, Lorna, onto a live chat date and do.
We'll look at diary in a minute, see if we can squeeze one, because otherwise it's going to be sort of July. I think we can get one in before that, but we'll have a look, won't we? See what we can do.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Good night.